countdown to the high court. After phone calls and interviews with top candidates, the president and vice president spent time together Friday night at Mr. Trump's Bedminster, New Jersey home, and were told that choosing a Supreme Court nominee was expected to be part of their dinner conversation.
No doubt
Plugging his next pick.
As you know, there's now a vacancy on the Supreme Court.
The president drummed up interest for his decision as a televised event.
And if you turn in Monday at 9 o'clock, I think you're going to be extremely happy with the selection, right? And they're all great. They're all great.
A Supreme Final Four. Two of retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy's former clerks are in the running, Brett Kavanaugh and Raymond Kethledge. Kavanaugh also has political experience as a top aide to George W. Bush.
I believe my White House experience made me a more knowledgeable judge, certainly, and also a more independent judge.
Amy Coney Barrett, a devout Catholic, is considered a favorite among religious conservatives. And Thomas Hardiman, who was in the final two when the president chose Neil Gorsuch last year. Beyond the court, the president made his case on trade, imposing $34 billion of new tariffs on Chinese goods, provoking China to retaliate.
I respect China and I respect President Xi, but they've been killing us.
The president claims this new economic pressure will lead to improved trade agreements, despite likely higher prices and job losses. But one high-profile new job starts Monday at the Environmental Protection Agency. With Scott Pruitt out over a maze of ethics allegations, acting administrator Andrew Wheeler takes charge, a former coal industry lobbyist and longtime advocate for reducing government regulations on businesses that generate carbon emissions.
More on Pruitt in a moment here, Kellyo, but there's also an update this morning as it relates to the Mueller investigation as well. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, Craig, it's really about will the president submit to an interview in that investigation? And the New York Times reports that the president's legal team is setting a new bar, asking Robert Mueller to provide any information to say whether or not he has found actual evidence that the president himself committed a crime, and whether they've used every other avenue, like other witnesses or looking through documents, to get the answers they seek. Now, that kind of a demand suggests that it's even more unlikely the president would voluntarily submit to an interview in the investigation. And so far, the Office of the Special Counsel is not commenting. Craig?
Kelly O'Donnell traveling with the president. Kellyo, thank you.
Robert Costa is a national political reporter for The Washington Post and moderator of Washington Week on PBS. Robert, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So, Robert, the president, again, making this announcement, prime time Monday night. Who are the top contenders and what are the chances that the president's pick is not confirmed by the upper chamber?
An outsider president has to first decide, does he want someone from outside of the Ivy League? If you look at Judge Coney Barrett and Judge Hardiman, they both hold degrees from Notre Dame. Judge Raymond Kethledge had a degree from the University of Michigan Law School. And Judge Brett Kavanaugh, he's the Yale graduate, Yale Law School, and Yale undergrad, a favorite of the Republican establishment. Whomever the president selects is going to have a tough fight ahead in the U.S. Senate because we're just months ahead of the midterm elections, and Republicans have a narrow 51-seat majority.
Hey, Robert, I want to put the pictures back on the screen here of the four top contenders one more time, because with Judge Kethledge, his relationship Judge Kavanaugh, his relationship with the Bush administration, how much might that hurt him as a contender?
Based on my reporting, the president at his New Jersey golf club on Air Force One this week has been raising the Bush question, wondering whether Judge Kavanaugh's experience in the Bush White House would maybe not play so well with President Trump's base. At the same time, Judge Kavanaugh is a former clerk to Justice Anthony Kennedy, so he is seen as someone with a diversity of background when it comes to legal and political experience.
Let's talk about these tariffs. We're in what now appears to be the beginning of a trade war with China, the White House hoping to punish them for some of their controversial trade policies. I guess the question this morning, will this force China to make changes, fulfilling a campaign promise for Trump, or will this backfire ahead of the elections, the midterms?
China has struck back with its own retaliation with its own tariffs against the $34 billion the U.S. has put on Chinese goods. But this is a political gamble by President Trump. Many of the industries and companies that are being hit the hardest by China's response are those companies in industries in the Midwest, like agricultural groups. And these are part of the president's base, and he needs to make sure they're with him for these midterms.
Scott Pruitt facing 15 separate investigations, forced to resign a few days ago. This administration has the highest turnover rate of any in the past 100 years. Robert, what does that do in terms of the White House's ability to just do business?
The controversies and scandals with Administrator Pruitt were certainly a problem for this administration going on months. White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, based on my reporting, wanted him out of there. At the same time, remember, this is an administration that has a deregulatory agenda. Andrew Wheeler, the new acting head of the EPA, he's someone who's going to continue to do what Scott Pruitt was doing, which was take a very conservative position on climate change and greenhouse gases in the coal industry.
Got a lot covered this morning. Robert Costa, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.